The wine glass in my hand was perfectly still, but my chest felt like it was caving in. 80 guests filled the private dining room at the Spoke Club in downtown Toronto. The candlelight caught every diamond, every designer watch, every careful smile in the room. My mother-in-law, Patricia, stood at the head of the long oak table, tapping a butter knife against her crystal glass until the room fell quiet. She looked luminous in a cream blazer that probably cost more than my first semester of university. She said she had an announcement. She said it with the particular warmth that wealthy women deploy when they want an audience to love them. She reached into the leather portfolio beside her plate and pulled out a document. She said that as a gift to her son Robert and his new wife, that's me, Clara, she was formally transferring her controlling interest in Maple and Stone Design Group, the family's boutique interior design firm. The one I had spent 4 years quietly rebuilding from a company bleeding money into one, generating $2.3 million in annual revenue. The table erupted, glasses raised. Someone whistled. Robert squeezed my hand under the table, beaming, turning to accept congratulations from his brother and his father, with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted the world would give him things. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I held my wine glass and I watched Patricia fold the document back into its envelope with a slow, satisfied elegance, the way a person moves when they believe the story is already over. She hadn't looked at me once. To her, I was the audience. I was the nice girl her son had married, the one who had grown up in a semi-detached in Scarborough, the one whose parents drove a 2009 Honda Civic, the one who should have been grateful just to sit at this table. She had no idea that the company she'd just publicly gifted to her son was already mine. Had been mine for 11 months. Every share, every asset, every debt she didn't know about, all of it, legally, quietly, irrevocably mine. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this reaches. My name is Clara, and I'm 31 years old. I grew up in the East End of Toronto, the daughter of a Filipino-Canadian nurse and a high school shop teacher. I put myself through a commerce degree at Ryerson. It's Toronto Metropolitan, now working weekends at a King Street restaurant and summers doing bookkeeping for small businesses along the Danforth. I am not the person people in Robert's family expected him to marry. I knew that the moment I met Patricia at their Rosedale home for the first time. Watched her take in my off-brand blazer and my drugstore earrings in one brief, polite sweep of her eyes, and then turned to ask Robert if he wanted more sparkling water. Robert was not like his mother. That's the honest truth, and it matters to the story. He was warm and funny, and entirely blind to his own privilege in the way that genuinely kind people sometimes are. He loved me. I never doubted that. What he could not see, what he had never needed to see, was the architecture of control his family had built around everything they owned, including him. I joined Maple and Stone 4 years ago, as their financial director. The firm had a beautiful reputation, and a catastrophic back office. Patricia had run it for 20 years on relationships and taste, and the kind of casual confidence that sometimes substitutes for competence in certain tax brackets. When I arrived, the accounts receivable was a disaster. 3 major clients were 60, 90, over 120 days past due. The bookkeeping software hadn't been reconciled in 8 months. The HST remittances were late twice in 1 year, which put them on CRA's radar. The company had roughly $340,000 in unsecured operating debt spread across 2 lines of credit that Patricia had personally guaranteed, but had stopped monitoring. I fixed it. Not because anyone asked me to fix it. Not because I was paid to fix it. I was hired to manage, not to rebuild. I fixed it because I am the kind of person who cannot watch something broken and do nothing. I restructured the receivables. I renegotiated the lines of credit. I brought in a new project management system that cut administrative overhead by 30%. I found $180,000 in unbilled work from the previous 2 years that the team hadn't followed up on, and I collected almost all of it. Within 18 months, the company was profitable for the first time in 4 years. Patricia thanked me exactly once. A brief, bright, well done, Clara at a staff Christmas party, and then she turned to tell her friend about a kitchen renovation in Forest Hill. When Robert and I got engaged, Patricia sat across from me at a lunch I had been dreading and said, very pleasantly, that she hoped I understood that Maple and Stone was a family asset, that it would eventually pass to Robert, that she trusted I understood the distinction between my professional contributions and ownership. I smiled and said of course. What I did not say was that 6 weeks earlier, I had discovered something in the company's incorporation documents that Patricia had either forgotten or never fully understood. When Maple and Stone was founded, it was structured as a closely held corporation. Patricia held 51%. The remaining 49% had been issued to a numbered company, 1187432 Ontario Incorporated, which had been set up by the family's original lawyer, who had retired in 2019. When I started digging into the back office mess in my first year, I found that the numbered company had been administratively dissolved in 2021 due to lapsed annual filings. No one had noticed. No one had bothered to check. The 49% of shares it held had, as a matter of corporate law, reverted to the company itself as treasury shares. And as the person who had been granted signing authority over the company's accounts to manage the restructuring, I had access to the corporate minute book. I hired my own lawyer, a quiet, excellent woman named Josephine, who works out of a modest office on Bay Street and charges accordingly. She reviewed everything. Then she reviewed it again. Then she told me that with the right documentation, the right steps, and Patricia's persistent lack of attention to her own corporate records, it was entirely possible that I could issue those treasury shares to a new holding company. Legally. Cleanly. Without a single forged signature. It took 8 months. It took careful, methodical, exhausting work. It took every skill I had ever built, from every job I had ever worked, to put myself through school and prove myself in rooms where people like me were not expected to belong. And on a Tuesday morning in October, Josephine sent me a 2-sentence email. She said the transfer was complete and had been registered with the Ontario Business Registry. She said I now held 51% of Maple and Stone Design Group through my holding company, Clara North Holdings Incorporated. I held my phone in my hands for a long time after that. I had not told Robert. That was the part I had wrestled with the most, lying awake at 3 a.m. going over it from every angle. Robert was not complicit in what his mother had done to that company, to my career, to the quiet years of work she had absorbed and never properly acknowledged. But he also had never once asked, never once looked at the books, never once said, "Clara, this turnaround you've managed is extraordinary. What do you need? How can I protect your contributions here?" He had trusted that his family would do right by me, because he trusted his family. That trust was the luxury of someone who had never had reason to distrust them. I chose not to tell him. Not because I wanted to deceive him. Because I needed to understand first what Patricia would do when the moment came. I needed to know who I was really dealing with. Now I knew. The dinner continued around me. Robert's older brother gave a toast. His father, Gordon, a retired corporate lawyer, clapped Robert on the shoulder and said something about legacy. Patricia accepted compliments with practiced grace, occasionally glancing down the table at me with an expression I can only describe as benevolent ownership. She thought she had managed me. She thought the gift was also a leash. I excused myself to use the restroom. In the narrow hallway outside the private dining room, I opened my phone and sent a text to Josephine. 3 words. "It's happening tonight." She replied in under a minute. "I'm ready." When I returned to the table, Patricia was mid-story about a project the firm had done in Yorkville, holding court with the particular energy of someone who is about to feel very powerful. I sat down, picked up my wine glass, and waited for a pause. "Patricia," I said. My voice was even. "I want to say something about the gift." She turned to me with the gentle, patient smile she reserved for moments when she expected to be thanked. I said, "I think there may be some documentation you'll want to review before anything is finalized." She laughed softly. The laugh of a woman who is not used to being redirected. "I think the documentation is perfectly in order, Clara." Gordon reviewed it himself. I nodded once. "I'm sure he reviewed the share transfer," I said. "But there may be some elements of the current shareholding structure that he wasn't aware of when he did." Gordon put down his glass. He had the eyes of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms, and they sharpened immediately. "What are you referring to?" I set my phone on the table and opened Josephine's email. The one with the Ontario Business Registry confirmation attached. I turned the screen toward Gordon. The room had shifted. Not loudly. Just subtly, the way a room shifts when the temperature drops, and no one is sure where the draft is coming from. Gordon read the screen. "Read it again. Put it down." Looked at me with an expression I will not forget for the rest of my life. Not anger, not yet, but the dawning recognition of someone who is watching a situation he thought he controlled reveal its actual dimensions. "Patricia," he said, his voice careful. "When did you last have the corporate records reviewed?" Patricia's smile had not moved, but it had stopped being real. "What do you mean?" She turned to me. "Clara. What is this?" "This is the current shareholding record for Maple and Stone Design Group," I said, still calm, still even. "As of October of last year, I hold 51% of the company through Clara North Holdings. The treasury shares from the dissolved numbered company were legally issued to my holding company, following a review of the corporate minute book. Josephine Park filed the registration. It's on record with the province." The silence was not the comfortable kind. Patricia set her wine glass down with a precision that suggested considerable effort. "That's not possible." "It is possible," I said. "It happened. And I want to be very clear that every step was legal, documented, and registered. I have not done anything wrong. What I have done is pay close attention to a corporate structure that no one else in this family bothered to understand. You are a employee, Patricia said, and her voice had found its steel. You had access to those records in a professional capacity. You used that access. I used that access to do my job, I said. For 4 years. I used it to save a company that was 8 months away from defaulting on its lines of credit when I arrived. I used it to collect $180,000 in outstanding invoices that this firm had simply abandoned. I used it to get the HST accounts out of arrears so that CRA didn't audit us. I rebuilt this company, Patricia, and when you announced just now, in front of all these people, that you were giving it to Robert, you were announcing the transfer of something that was already mine. Robert had gone very still beside me. I could feel it without looking at him. The particular stillness of a person processing something that is rearranging everything they thought they understood. You knew, he said quietly. His voice was not accusatory. It was something more complicated than that. I found out 11 months ago, I said. I've been trying to figure out what to do about it ever since. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know what your mother would do, and now I do. Patricia's composure had cracked in exactly one place, a small, tight tremor at the corner of her mouth. She turned to Gordon. Fix this. Gordon looked at me with the careful attention of someone performing a rapid legal assessment. Clara, he said, I want to understand the mechanism here. The Treasury shares were issued according to the procedures outlined in the Business Corporations Act, I said. Josephine can walk you through every step. She expected your call, actually. He sat back. And what is it that you want? I want what I've always wanted, I said. I want my contributions to this company to be recognized properly. I want a seat at the table, not a gift, not a leash. A legitimate ownership stake. Which, as it turns out, I already have. Robert put his hand over mine. Not to stop me. Just to be there. Patricia said nothing for a long moment. Then she looked at me, really looked. Maybe for the first time since I had walked into her family's life, and she said, in a voice stripped of its performance, You planned this. No, I said. I was thorough. Those aren't the same thing. The dinner ended shortly after that. Not dramatically. Not with shouting or tears, though I think the tears came later, in a car, somewhere on the Gardner heading back to Rosedale. The guests picked up on the shift in atmosphere, the way guests always do, and began making polite departures. Gordon said he would call Josephine in the morning. Patricia said nothing to me on the way out. She touched Robert's arm, briefly, and then she was gone. Robert and I sat at the emptying table, after most people had left, the servers quietly clearing around us. Are you angry with me? I asked him. He thought about it for a long time, which I respected. I'm not angry, he said. I think I'm embarrassed that I didn't see it. Any of it. The way she's always treated your work like it was a contribution to the family pot rather than something that was yours. I should have pushed back on that a long time ago. You trusted her. I did. He paused. Clara, what happens now? With the company? That depends on what your mother decides, I said. But either way, it's not going to be transferred to you as a gift. If you want a stake in it, we build that together. Properly. With a shareholders agreement that actually protects both of us. He looked at me for a moment. You really did save that company. I did. He was quiet. And my mother was going to take credit for handing it to me like it cost her something. I didn't answer that. He already knew the answer. Josephine and Gordon spoke for 2 hours the following morning. There was no legal challenge. There couldn't be. The filing was clean, and Gordon, whatever else he was a thorough enough lawyer to recognize when a position was unwinnable. What came out of it was a meeting, then a second meeting, then a negotiated shareholders agreement that gave Robert a 25% stake acquired at fair market value, with a proper vesting schedule. Because I had decided somewhere in those long 3 a.m. calculations that I did not want to destroy my marriage over this. I wanted to build something. I just wanted to build it honestly. Patricia and I have a functional relationship now. Cool. Professional. She no longer pats my hand at family dinners or talks over me when the conversation turns to the firm. She understands, I think, that the board of the company she founded is now chaired by a woman who grew up in a semi-detached in Scarborough and put herself through school waiting tables, and that woman is not going to be managed. There was a moment, a few weeks after the dinner, when Patricia and I were in the office for a project review, and everyone else had stepped out. She looked at me across the conference table and said, very quietly, that she hadn't understood what she had. In the company, she meant. Or perhaps in me. I was never entirely sure. I said thank you, and I meant it. Because here is the thing I have thought about a great deal in the months since that dinner at the Spoke Club. Patricia had never been taught to see work like mine as something that created ownership. She had been taught to see it as service. The people who cleaned things up, organized things, fixed the broken systems they were support. They were not principals. That wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was a failure of imagination that had calcified over decades into assumption. I had spent my entire adult life surrounded by that assumption. I had learned, through every scholarship application, and every double shift, and every room where I was the only person without a trust fund, that the only way to be safe was to be so thoroughly competent that the assumption couldn't survive contact with the facts. That evening at the Spoke Club, the facts were on the table. I drove home that night on the DVP with the city lights coming up on either side, and I thought about my parents, my father with his shop class and his careful budgeting, my mother with her 12-hour nursing shifts, and her absolute refusal to be defeated by anything. I thought about what they had given me, which was not money or connections or a name that opened doors, but something more durable, the understanding that preparation is its own form of power, that you do not need to shout if you have done the work. I turned off my phone notifications. I drove in the quiet. For the first time in 4 years, I was not bracing for something. I was not waiting for the next moment when someone would try to take what was mine, or dismiss what I had built, or smile at me with that particular warmth that is really a kind of condescension. It was over. And everything that came next, I would build on ground that actually belonged to me.